Today we are going to talk about dots and ties, also known as augmentation dots and tenuto ties. These are two types of markings used to alter a note's duration. That is just a fancy word for saying that it makes them longer. Let's talk about the dot first. So, notice this dot is to the right of the note. It is not below it or above it. If it were a dot that was right here below this note, it would be called a staccato. When it is right next to a note, it actually increases the duration or length of time of this note. So you would hold it out, sing it longer. So, let's talk about dots. A dot actually increases the duration of a note by 1/2 of its value. So for example, this quarter note is worth 1 beat. Therefore, half of 1 is actually 1/2. So this quarter note is worth a quarter note, and this dot is worth a half. So when we add that together, the total duration for this note is 1 quarter note plus a half. Or if we can substitute the half with another note, it would be an 1/8 note. So in all reality, this quarter note is equal to 1 quarter note plus an 1/8 note. So you would hold it out for a quarter note and an 1/8 note when you sing it. We can also see this if we were to take this quarter note and turn it into 2 1/8 notes, because we know that 2 1/8 notes is equal to 1 quarter. So we can look at this dotted quarter note as if it were 3 1/8 notes. So a whole plus a half. 1/2, 1/2, 1/2. So it would be 3 halves. Now, let's look at some other examples. So we have this half note plus the dot. So half of a half note is a quarter note. So we have a half note plus a quarter note. Let's check out this 1/8 note down here. We have our 1/8 note plus a dot. So we have our 1/8 note. Half of an 1/8 note is actually a 1/16 note. Let's look at this chart. So if we were to add a dot to a whole note, half of a whole note is a half note, so we would have a dot plus a whole note would be a whole note and a half note together. So it would be a total of 6 counts if this was 4 and this was 2. We already talked about a quarter note. Half of it would be an 1/8 note, and half of a half note would be a quarter, and half of an 1/8 note is a 16. So if we had a dotted 16th, what do you think would be next? For those of you that said a dotted 16th is equal to a 16th plus a 32nd note, you are completely right. And it just goes on and on. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing when we see these and we know what it means, but to actually sing it can be difficult. And that just comes with time. So let's go back, and now that we've talked about our dots, let's talk about our ties. So first off, let's notice something. These are 2 notes. And there's this little smiley face or this little curved line. This curved line is called a tie. Now don't get confused, because there are lots of curved lines in music, and those are called slurs as well. And they look exactly the same. However, they are completely different. And what makes them different is the fact that this note is the same pitch as this note. So, whenever you have 2 notes that are at the exact same pitch and there's a curved line underneath them, that means it is a tie. So what do we do when we get to a tie? Well, ties merge multiple notes together. So for example, even though this is worth 1 count, and this one is worth 1 count, we hold it, we sing here and hold it out for the second one. We do not sing separately for each note. We just sing once and hold it for the second count. So that would be as if it were a whole note, a half note. Now, usually you're probably thinking, why don't we just write a half note? If it's equal to a half note, why do we have to tie it? Well, I want you to notice, look at this line right here. This is our bar line. And we have a 4/4 time signature. That means that we can only have 4 beats in a measure. So say I'm writing a song and I have this 4 beats, but on the 4th beat, I really want to hold it out a little bit longer. Well, I can't put a half note here because it would occupy too many counts in the measure. So what I do is I split it up into 2 quarter notes, that half note that I wanted, and all I do is put the second quarter note on the other side of the bar line, and I connect it with a tie. So I still get my half note on the 4th count, but it occupies the 4th count of this measure and the 1st count of this measure. So it follows the rules of the measures and still allows me to have my half note on that 4th beat. The same would be as if I wanted a whole note. What I could do is I could put 1 quarter note here and then a dotted half note here, which would be equal to 3. And then I would have a 1 plus 3, which would equal 4. So that is why we use half notes. Ties, excuse me. So look at what would happen if we had an 8/4 measure. We could just do that, and it would be 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or we can split it. So if we had an 8/4 measure, we could totally put our half note in there and not have to worry about a tie. But because we're in 4/4, we have to split the note up so it follows the 4/4 time signature rule. Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know. That is our ties, and that is our dots.